So your book, Goods and Services Tax, Constitutional Law and Policy, has been referred to and quoted with approval by the Supreme Court. That's a rare honor. What inspired you to write it?
Indeed, you're right. It's a privilege to be vindicated in your views by the Supreme Court itself.
Hello everyone. It is with great pleasure and deep respect that we welcome you to this very special session where we have the distinct honor of hosting one of India's foremost legal minds in the domain of taxation, Mr. Tarun Jain. Mr. Jain brings with him over a decade of rich experience in indirect tax policy, litigation, and strategic advisory. He is also our GST expert for SCC Times. His seminal work, Goods and Services Tax, Constitutional Law and Policy, is widely regarded as one of the most comprehensive books on India's GST regime. Mr. Jain's insights have been instrumental in shaping the understanding of GST not just as a tax reform, but also as a constitutional and economic transformation. As India embarks on the next phase of GST, often referred to as GST 2.0, Mr. Jain's perspectives are more relevant than ever. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Mr. Tarun Jain. We look forward to an enlightening conversation that will deepen our understanding on GST and its far-reaching impact on its constitutional and legal framework. So my first question to you will be, the constitution process for the GST took many years in the making. What were the key reasons for the held-up and how were the issues addressed?
Very interesting question. And we need to deep dive into the constitutional history. If you look at it, it was as early as in 2003 that we had experts who pointed out that there was a need to bring a change in the system. They were pointing out to the inefficiencies which were existing in the constitutional design and the need to converge. It was done in phases. We had a white paper on VAT. Gradually, there were reforms. But then there was a need for a comprehensive change in this scheme. In 2009, the center and the states came together, introduced the first discussion paper on GST, which actually laid down the foundation for how the GST should be structured. And it was in this paper that the scheme of GST as a dual levy came fortified for the first time. And it was because of this scheme that there were many issues which came up because India had never experimented such a constitutional reform. And in order to address that, there were a large number of changes which were required. And taking forward, it was the 2011 Amendment Bill which factored these changes which were required to be introduced in the Constitution. You interestingly mentioned issues. There were actually many issues. And if you look at the 2013 Parliamentary Standing Committee report, it highlights the large range of issues which required to be addressed. If I can put them up summarily, it was actually a trust deficit which was holding up the GST. Now, to go into the issues, there were many. The foremost issue was that the states were worried they will lose their fiscal autonomy. They were concerned that after the coming into place of GST, they should still have the financial resources to carry out their activities as part of the state responsibilities. And because of that, there was a need which was felt for 5-year assured compensation, which had to be built in the constitutional scheme itself. Another sticking point was the Dispute Settlement Authority. The 2011 Amendment Bill provided that there will be an external body to adjudicate the disputes, which would have judges and experts to decide on the deviations by the center or the states. There was a vehement opposition that there should not be an external body. It should be decided within the mechanism of the union and states working together. And that's why the GST Council was administered that responsibility. So there were quite a few issues which were actually holding up. And it was in the 2013 Parliamentary Standing Committee report that these were crystallized, which were thereafter addressed in the 2014 Amendment Bill. And that's how we saw the Amendment Act in 2016 and the GST laws came into operation in 2017.
Yes. So there have been many constitutional amendments in the past. What is so unique about this GST amendment that requires a dedicated book in itself?
Interesting. And to put it in one word, it's a tectonic shift in the constitutional scheme. Let me elaborate. So far, the constitutional scheme is providing for a mechanism which distributes the legislative powers between the center and the states. And these powers are so distributed that they are exclusive. At any given point of time, either the union or the state can exercise these powers. In the context of GST, for the first time, there is a legislative subject where both the union and the states exercise their powers simultaneously. And that's why it's a huge reform. It has happened for the first time in India, and it has happened for any legislative subject, not just a taxing subject. So, in that way alone, it's a unique aspect which has been birthed by the 101st Amendment. But then, this is not just the only facet. There are many other facets. Many existing taxing subjects have been subsumed. So, for example, advertisement taxes, entry taxes, these fields no longer exist. They have been subsumed into a harmonized law of goods and services tax. So in that count also, there is quite a change in the legislative scheme of which taxes will be imposed. And that's why you have this popular moniker of one nation, one tax. Then there are many other dimensions which actually lay the foundation for future constitutional reforms as well. For example, we have a new constitutional institution called the Goods and Services Tax Council. Now, the scheme of the council is such that both the union and the states, they have to work together. Unless they come together for a decision making which they are aligned with each other, the council cannot work. And if the council cannot work, the GST policy cannot evolve, the GST laws cannot be enforced. So the union and the states, they have been brought together under a constitutional umbrella by which they work together. Now, there is maybe a dispute on what do you call it. It might be cooperative federalism or an Indianized version of federalism. But in either scenario, this was a need for the hour. The states and the union could not compete if the nation has to grow. So the GST constitutional amendment has brought the center and the states together. They work together. And interestingly, there are many anecdotes in which you see that the competing interest of the states vis-a-vis the union, and sometimes the states versus states, have been handled in such a delicate and such a responsible fashion in the GST Council that you actually feel that the democracy has matured. So in that sense, the constitutional amendment has actually laid a foundation for future constitutional reforms, and one will hope that this scheme of experimentation will not be confined only to GST. It will grow further.
Yeah, we hope the same. In your view, how has GST reshaped the constitutional relationship with the center and the state? Has it truly fostered cooperative federalism?
Very interesting question. And I must say that 8 years of working of GST Council actually reveals a lot as to how it has shaped the working relationship. You see, the Constitution permits voting, but GST Council has resorted to voting only once, and that too on a contentious issue where the dispute was not vis-a-vis the union and the states, but between states inter se. Other than that, there has never been voting which has ever been resorted to. So that shows that GST Council has been able to bring together union and all the states at an edge of uniformity, consensus, which reveals quite a shift as far as policy making is concerned. But then it's not just at the GST Council level. You see, there is cooperation between the union and the states at every level. Their officers work together, and their officers work together not just for the purpose of intelligence sharing, but in fact, the GST laws provide statutory reasons as to why they should work together. For example, you have the Advanced Ruling Authority. Now, Advanced Ruling Authority is jointly manned by the center and the state officers. So you have such kind of examples which show that cooperative federalism exists not just in theory, but in practice. Then there are other reasons for cooperation between them. You have group of ministers, which is a select group of ministers coming together to bring out solutions. Then you have committee of officers, which actually is a joint working committee of the union and the state officers, which will evolve solutions. So you see that at every level, there are reasons for a union and the states to work together. Let's take another example. It's not that 8 years have been very smooth. there have been reasons for discord. But all these reasons have been ultimately addressed in a very mature session. For example, you have the GST compensation cess. You see, during COVID, there was a lot of stress on both the union and the states for revenue. And there was a clamor that certain solutions need to be addressed. Ultimately, after many meetings though, the union and the states came together and the center agreed that the concern of the states was well founded. They went for external borrowings and thus the interests of the states were protected by the center. So it reveals that there is a reason for both the state and the center to work together. Then you have other contentious issues. You had the flood cess issue in which Kerala faced unprecedented floods in 2018. But they did not go for any knee-jerk reaction. They waited for the council to evolve its policy and ultimately they abided by it. Then there were concerns regarding sugar cess, which were raised by sugar producing states. And ultimately the GST Council was able to ensure that these do not break the spirit of bonhomie and cooperation between the center and the states. So there are quite a few examples, I must say, and which reveal that we are going in the right direction as far as impetus to cooperative federalism is concerned.
So your book, Goods and Services Tax, Constitutional Law and Policy, has been referred to and quoted with approval by the Supreme Court. That's a rare honor. So what inspired you to write it, and what do you think are its most impactful contributions to the legal discourse?
Indeed, you're right. It's a privilege to be vindicated in your views by the Supreme Court itself. It is. And I must say that the journey for the book actually started with my quest to appreciate how deep this impact of the Constitution Amendment is going to be. And I found that the changes are substantive, which require a very detailed dissection. So let me give you a few examples what prompted me. For the first time ever, simultaneous lawmaking was being permitted by the Constitution, which is quite a contrast for more than almost 100 years of constitutional history, where the center and the states will work separately, even predating the Constitution of India. So simultaneous lawmaking is quite a change in terms of the constitutional functioning. And then to be aided and advised by way of a recommendation by another constitutional institution, namely the GST Council, is again quite a change. Then there are other examples. For example, earlier the taxes were levied on limited aspect. You had central excise duty on manufacture, you had VAT on sale of goods, entry tax on entry of goods. These were limited subjects. GST has actually created a new legislative subject, namely tax on supply, which is very wide-based. And in fact, it is so wide that the Constitutional itself defines that any tax on supply of goods and services will constitute GST. The only exception being taxes on alcoholic liquor for human consumption. So the constitutional framers have dubbed it very widely. Then there are other instances which GST creates exceptions from the constitutional scheme. You see, the proceeds of the center are shared with the states by way of the mechanism of the Finance Commission. But this is an exception in the context of GST. For the context of GST proceeds of the center, there are specific provisions which have been inserted in the Constitution to provide for its distribution. Then there are other avenues for dispute settlement, which again is a unique aspect. And hence you will find that there are many constitutional reasons which pivot GST as a new norm in the constitutional scheme. And these were some of the motivating factors, besides the fact that there was a rich history of certain concepts which are now being instituted. For example, GST, and this now the Supreme Court has also validated, is a consumption-based destination tax. Hence, you will find that internationally accepted concepts are now finding way in the Indian tax policy. So you will find that there are reasons to deep dive into this legislative scheme from a constitutional viewpoint, from a taxation viewpoint, and also from a citizenry perspective. So I always thought that this might be a book worth experimenting, and it came as a huge blessing when the Supreme Court vindicated my attempts as well.
So this edition has extensively enriched the previous edition with the case studies. What do you think is the most critical decision of the Supreme Court so far, that explores the GST landscape of the Constitution?
You're right. There have been quite a few judgments. In fact, these judgments made me experiment with the second edition of the book. And to answer pinpointedly to one unique decision, I would say it's the 2022 judgment in Mohit Minerals. That judgment goes very deep into the Constitution amendment, and two aspects stand out. One is it positions GST Council as the recommendatory body, which is actually the heart and soul of GST. It makes recommendations on a wide variety of aspects: model laws, principles, rules, areas to be taxed, areas to be exempted, etc. The second aspect which the judgment postulates is the simultaneous decision-making power of the union and the states, which is a very critical facet of the GST constitutional amendment. The judgment goes very deep into examining the consequences of this amendment, and it highlights that because of this particular mechanism, the union and the states have to agree together in order to enable the enforcement of GST laws. So on these two counts, the judgment actually stands out. But I must say, this judgment is not the only judgment. I, in my research, came across many other judgments of the Supreme Court, and I have actually shortlisted quite a few judgments which address salient features of the constitutional amendment. So, to give you an example, there is another judgment of Skill Lotto. That judgment actually encompasses one very rich aspect of GST, which is that GST is a reform. GST's interpretation, its scope, should not be tied down by the pre-GST laws. And hence, it differentiates the scope of GST from the erstwhile sales tax laws and states with fortitude that what was not taxable under the sales tax law could still be taxed under GST. So in that sense, it postulates the wide scope of GST. Then there are a couple more examples. As early as in 2018 itself, we had another Mohit Mineral case which upheld the validity of GST compensation cess. Now you must note that this compensation cess was a very critical tool which allowed the union to ensure that the states were on board the GST design. The states were apprehensive of their loss of fiscal buoyancy, and hence compensation cess was actually a mechanism which ensured that they could have guaranteed GST revenue. So there are quite a few Supreme Court judgments, and I must say all of these judgments have upheld one or other facet of the GST constitutional amendment. So there is a rich fodder for a researcher, there is a rich ammunition for a lawyer, and a rich perspective for a reader, which actually encompasses your understanding of the GST design.
In your book, you have made certain references to the working of GST Council. Would you like to share some interesting anecdotes that reveal its working style?
You are right, actually. In my research, I came across extensive minutes of GST Council meetings, which are very rich in flavor, in perspective, how policies evolved, what are the digressing aspects, how do they converge, etc. And I have the occasion of penning certain aspects of these in the second edition. I must say that some of these anecdotes are quite rich and unbelievable in some sense. For example, you have the tax on lottery. There was a huge dispute on what should be the rate of tax on lottery tickets. As you can imagine, lottery brings in a lot of revenue, so the rate of tax makes certainly an impact. But the dispute was not on account of that. The dispute was between states inter se. Certain northeastern states were opposing the view of Kerala that what should be the competing rate of tax on the GST lottery tickets. And there were more of policy differences rather than revenue differences. In fact, that's the only time where GST Council had to resort to voting. And that issue required multiple GST Council meetings, multiple GOMs to resolve the issue. Fortunately, there was no requirement for voting on other sensitive areas. For example, during COVID, there were multiple heated discussions between the members as to how the union and the states should address the revenue gap because of COVID. In fact, 2 times opinion had to be sought from the Attorney General for India in order to understand the legal nuances for options which were there before the council members. And ultimately, it was agreed that the union will borrow and it will compensate the states as per the agreed mechanism. Now, this actually reveals that there is a lot of bonhomie in the final sense, even though there might be passionate debates during the origin or during the discussion of the issue. But ultimately, there is an attempt to resolve the issue. Then there are other examples as well. For example, there was a flood cess which required the attention of the members of the council. In 2018, Kerala faced massive floods, and there was a request from the state to levy flood cess in order to address the consequences of the flood. They waited for a year patiently, and the GST Council in the meanwhile formulated the rules for levy of flood cess, which were then implemented by Kerala. So that reveals that there is a template in motion in which the members agree to abide by the larger understanding without any knee-jerk reactions. Then there are certain other contentious policy issues which reveal that GST Council does not have any institutional ego. Take, for example, taxation of high sea sales. You see, this issue has attracted their attention more than twice or thrice. They have been required to recommend amendments, and in certain cases, amendments with retrospective effect, because ultimately the issues have to be resolved. So these reveals that yes, there are wide variety of perspectives which are being debated, and the GST Council is not shy of revisiting them. The ultimate idea will be that Article 279A, which mandates that a harmonized national market for goods and services is what is the goal of GST, is actually what is being pursued by the GST Council. And I must say that I have myself been surprised with the kind of rich variety of options which have been debated before the council and the manner in which they have converged. It's a template for cooperative federalism for sure. And in fact, it's a template for other areas of discord to be resolved, which I must certainly say GST Council provides a very, very good experience and mature platform to do that.
Before we wrap up, I would like to ask, when do we get to read your next book?
As we speak, the book is already in the press, so I'm very sure that you will have a hard copy pretty soon.
I'm sure our readers will be as excited to get their hands on the book as I am. Thank you so much, Mr. Jain, for sharing your invaluable insights and perspective with us today. Your deep understanding of GST and its constitutional dimensions has truly enriched our understanding of this transformative tax reform. To our viewers, we hope you found this conversation as engaging and insightful as we did. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We have a host of exciting interviews and panel discussions coming, so stay tuned for our upcoming videos as well. Thank you so much.